I'm not going to get this guy. This guy looks like it was strange. Um, I'll accept a couple other people, but hopefully I can finish my answer before the next question comes up. Okay, so the Talmud basically was written over a period of about 500 years, 600 years. There was the Babylonian Talmud, which was okay. So it started about 200 BC, yeah, BCE or BC, however you want to say that. Um, and then the Jerusalem Talmud was codified around 200 in the 200s Common Era, and then the Babylonian Talmud was a little bit later. And what it is basically is it's a whole bunch of it's at the end of the era with Judea, there was something called the Sanhedrin, and that was 72 judges who would sit and they would make law. It was like a Supreme Court. They would look at the Torah. People would come to them with cases and say, well, this is my claim and this is my neighbor's claim. Based on the Torah, how do you decide? And they would issue decrees of how to decide that. So I would say 40% of the Talmud is exegesis. In other words, it's trying to interpret the Bible, what biblical law is. What the rabbis also did was, after the temple was destroyed, they also created a whole set of laws that were to guard the Torah. They were saying, well, there's no longer a temple. It's not so easy to get forgiveness anymore. People don't have a central spiritual authority anymore without the temple. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a whole bunch of laws to make sure people don't violate the biblical laws. Now, if you violate a rabbinical law, there were punishments if you lived under rabbinical rule, but there's no punishment for the soul. In other words, God doesn't punish for rabbinical law, but the rabbis, would have to have some authority to make their law, so they would have some sort of punishment if you violated rabbinical law. These days, without any sort of rabbinical overseer authority, even in Israel, so Israel's constitution is not the Torah, it's not the Bible. Israel's constitution is something else. So now most Orthodox will follow rabbinical law to a certain extent, whether you're all the way right-wing Orthodox and all the way to modern liberal conservadox, as they say, and then there's Reform. I don't want to get into the different separations, but how much of the rabbinical law a person will keep. The Talmud is 40% is exegesis, saying what the biblical law is. It's about 40% of rabbinical law, and then the rest of it is anecdotes, stories, history, things like that. A lot of the history and a lot of the anecdotes have to be taken with a grain of salt, because they were mostly for parabolic purposes. And the reason why they wrote it is because, and they wrote that, and we know something called the Medrash, which is not incorporated in the Talmud, but it's outside the Talmud. And the Medrash was written until about the year 1100. There was more, it kept being added, and that's basically, and the Medrash is basically all stories. And the reason for that is because when Jews were under Roman oppression, and they weren't able to learn Torah openly, they had to pass things through parable, through stories. So that's why we take with a grain of salt all the stories that are in the Talmud, whether they're literal or they're not literal. I tend to believe the Torah, the Bible, is very literal. The 5 books of Moses. I think a lot of the prophets and those are also literal history to the best of what humans could have written down. There were more human writing, the books of the prophets and the chronicles, than God written. I think Moses was more godly inspired than they were. I think the 5 books of Moses is very literal. Then you have the history, and then you have the Talmud. That was my long-winded answer. Sorry about that.
So about the Talmud, we described it in 3 major sections. Which section would these verses fall under? It states that a Jew is okay. It's okay for a Jew to have sex with a 3-year-old that's not of Jewish descent, or having dinner with a Goyim is like having dinner with a Catholic.
Okay, so first of all, we'll say a major disclaimer. No Gentiles have been harmed in the writing of the Talmud. And the reason why I say that is because no matter what you find in the Talmud, there's not a history at all of Jews ever uprising and fighting against Gentiles. Now, I'm going to take Israel right now, the most recent creation. It's a state. It has right to defend itself. We'll leave that politics aside. That the Talmud was written thousands of years ago. For 1900 years, when throughout the entire exile so far, it has not been the Jews have risen up and taken things in the Talmud and say, let's go persecute our neighbors. It's been exactly the opposite. So therefore, let's take that, number one. Okay, the Talmud is a harmless in that way. Number two is it does not say anywhere that anyone can have sex with 3-year-old. There is age of consent. That's usually at 13, by the way. In the Talmudic times, age of consent was 13. It was not 18 like we have. But most actual documents from that time don't even have an age of consent. And we see, especially in the Arab world, where people younger than that were actually subjected to sexual touching, sexual abuse. But I'm not going to go into that. Let's go into the Talmud. The Talmud does not say anywhere that a 3-year-old could be touched. The Talmud does talk about cases whether or not a 3-year-old may or may not have lost its virginity for whatever reason, let's say through a sexual abuse, or let's say through riding on a horse. And the question is then, when that child grows up and becomes an adult and getting married, what the bridal price is. Is it still a virgin? Is not a virgin? And it talks about, well, if it's under 3 years old, then she still retain her virgin status. If unfortunately she was molested younger than that, she will not. The Talmud does not condone any of that touching or molestation. However, the rabbis had to deal with reality and say, well, there's a case that came before us where unfortunately an uncle was sick in the head and abused this child. Now this child is 14, 15 and is trying to get a bridal price. What's a bridal price? The rabbis had to decide. So that's number one about those things. As far as dinner with goyim, no. The Talmud does say a lot, and for good reason, that it does not want to share a table with the Gentiles. Because think of when the Talmud was written. The Talmud was written when there was Roman oppression. The Talmud did not want that Jews should assimilate with the Romans. There was a Hellenistic period that followed after the Greek intrusion into Judea with Antiochus. And then the story of Hanukkah, if you're familiar with that, but it was about 250 years before 250 BC, before the Hasmonean dynasty rose up. There was the Seleucids who came to conquer Judea, and they put idols in the temple. So there are things in the Talmud that say, be careful, don't associate with Gentiles, don't assimilate with them. And the truth is, we still have practice today. We try not to intermarry because if we intermarry, soon enough, we're so small as it is, there just won't be any Jews left. We hope that we could retain the numbers that we have. Now, people don't like it, and people say, oh, it's not fair that Jews don't want to intermarry. I understand. I understand that. I understand that. And there are a lot of Jews that do intermarry. And unfortunately, while we're getting a lot of people who are coming more religious again, and actually we're getting some converts in this era, a lot of people are intermarrying, and we're losing a lot of people from the Jewish religion. We're only 15 million people in the world. 15 million people out of a world of 8 billion. We're very small. We intermarry too much. We're gonna be gone in a second. So take whatever you see in the Talmud with a grain of salt. In that, I will address any specific things, and I know people are gonna want to ask about Jesus. I'll address it. But you can't look at the Talmud as a document that's meant to harm Gentiles. It's not. It's a legal codifying document. Did it talk about best practices? Sure. So go on. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
That's all right. So what about Kahanism then? Kahanism is something that was made up in the early 1900s, and that's like something.
Are you talking about from no
prejudice on Muslims?
No. You're talking about Rabbi Kahana.
No, I'm talking about Kahanism.
Yeah, which is from Rabbi Kahana. He was a zealot and advocate. He was an Israeli. He fought in the wars. He was very against the Arabs because he lived through the independence. And when Israel decided to declare its independence, it was attacked by 5 Arab countries. And it was outnumbered 3-1. And there was like 1 rifle per every 3 Jewish soldiers. Until then, the British had made a blockade, didn't allow Holocaust survivors to come to Palestine. They didn't allow any weapons to come in. the Jews were outnumbered, outgunned. They were surrounded by hostile Arab neighbors. No one wanted them. Not a single Arab nation was like, yeah, sure, welcome the Jews to come to this land. Even the portions, by the way, people think like in 1948, all of a sudden Jews came from nowhere and landed in Israel. That's not what happened. Starting from earlier times. First of all, Jews never left the land. Even after the exile, there was a great yeshiva in Yavne, which is where the Jerusalem Talmud was written, and Jews were there. Yavne is on the coast. It was near Ashkelon area, right on the Mediterranean. So Jews had never really left. More Jews came through the exile. Jews always made up about a third.
Back in the 40s, though, that Jews made up like 70% of the European population, and then they made up like, it was 60% of the European population of Jews, and then it was like 30% of Jews were Soviets, and then the 10% were just kind of scattered around the world.
You talk about, I'm not sure. I'll show you numbers are. Jews never made up 40% of anything. Are you talking about in the land?
Jews made up, like, lived in Europe.
You mean had lived in Europe?
Yeah.
So yeah, throughout the exile, let's just call 2,000 years, even though it's still like 1,950 years. Throughout the exile, Jews have always come from wherever they were back to the land because they were exiled. 97,000 slaves, Jewish slaves, were taken by the Romans and they were put into Europe. How did you Jews end up in Europe? Because the Romans put them there. The Romans took 97,000 slaves after they conquered Judea, and they brought them to Rome, and they spread them throughout Europe. That's how Jews got to Europe in the first place. So Jews stayed there. Travel was never easy. There weren't a lot of airlines. Palestine was at that time wasn't called Palestine. It was a Roman place, and then eventually changed hands a lot. But throughout that time, it was full of wars. It was full of deserts. It wasn't really settled by any one people. No one really came to cultivate the land in all that time, which was actually predicted in the Torah and the Bible. It said once you leave, it's going to remain fallow and it's going to be uncultivated, which happened. I know someone's yelling at me to talk about the Zohar. We'll talk about the Zohar in a second if that person's still in the group. But I just want to answer. So Jews have always come from Europe and went to the land, and there was a big movement in the late 1800s to come. And by the way, when Jews came, there weren't a lot of Arabs in that land either. There were some Christians, there were some Arabs, there were some Jews, and Jews came and they bought up land legally. They went and they settled in certain places legally. They didn't kick anyone out. There was no one kicking anyone out in the 1800s. There was no one kicking anyone out in the 1900s. Jews came, and then after 1917, when the League of Nations decided there's going to be a Palestine mandate and eventually make a place for the Jews, all of a sudden, you know what happened? Not only did Jews come in, but Arabs came in also. The Arab population between 1917 and 1947 almost quadrupled in the land. They came. Jordan flooded the land with people, and Egypt flooded the land with people. Saudi Arabia flooded the land with people. People who did not live at all in that area. They said the Jews are going to get the land. We have to quickly settle the land first. It became a fight. And the second the world decided that the Jews are going to get a homeland, there was a pogrom already in Hebron where the Arabs on a Sabbath killed hundreds of Jews unprovoked. There was riots in the 1930s, going on and on and on. From the first second the world said there's going to be a Jewish state here, the Arabs did everything they can to make sure that the Jews have not. And I'm not saying Israel's perfect. I'm not saying Israel has done everything that it should do. But Israel is not the only nation in the world, and there's a lot of other worse things going on. The fact that the world focuses on Israel is what I call the Haman problem. If you want to know what the Haman problem is, I could discuss it. No. I don't know. First of all, I don't know what propaganda you're reading. A Haman problem is like this. Oh, you mean because there was a couple of people who were going to be convicted here, so they ran to Israel for asylum because Israel doesn't have an extradition treaty. So all of a sudden, the entire Israeli population becomes pedophiles. That is number A1 anti-Semitic, because two people. Well, you're bringing it up as a gotcha. It's not exactly a gotcha, okay? Because you're talking about this. There's over 6 million Jews that are in Israel, and you're talking about there are 3 or 4 people who ran from America. All of a sudden, now Israel's painted in a certain light. There's no gotcha. We could discuss facts. Let's not discuss gotcha. A Haman problem is in the Book of Esther. If you're familiar with the Book of Esther, there was a person named Haman who rose in the government, and because one Jew, did not bow to him, Mordecai, he decided that he wanted to kill every single Jew, not only in the Shushan, which is a city where he wanted to kill every Jew everywhere in the entire world, and that's exactly the problem the world has now. It's predicted in the Bible, and it says, no matter how small we are, even if we only have one country in the entire world, even if we make up less than 1% of the world's population, all eyes will always be on us, and it's our problem. We are everyone's problem, and therefore they have to do everything to get rid of us. But guess what? You can't, because the Bible also said you can't get rid of us. So maybe it's about time we all decide just live in peace. Just my thoughts.
Yeah. And this is my last question, so I gotta go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Opinion, since you clearly support Jewish nationality and nationalism, is it wrong for white nationalism and black nationalism to a thing?
I don't know what the connection at all is there. White nationalism means that there has to be a place where there's only whites. No Jew thinks there's a place where there's only Jews. As a matter of fact, even the Temple era, in the Bible's full of it. It keeps saying the law is between the citizen and the stranger alike. Even back then, there were Gentiles that lived in Judea, welcomed as long as they lived under the Constitution, which was the Torah. They were welcome. There was no forced conversion. Jews have never forced converted anyone. In Israel right now, there are 20% of the population is Arab citizens who not only are citizens, they are judges, they are doctors, they are in the army, and they have full rights. Right, and exactly.
You don't if you're an Arab.
But the point is, if you're an Arab, if you're a Jew, if you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, it makes no difference. As long as you're an Israeli citizen in Israel, you're accepted. Eventually, if 100%.
There's a bunch of Christians.
There's not a single place in Israel where Christians cannot go, except where the Arabs control. I'll agree with that. You're right. The Arabs keep the Christians out of Nazareth and Bethlehem. You're right. It's a problem. The Arabs also keep Jews out of places. The Arabs don't allow the Jews to go to the Temple Mount. The Arabs do not allow us to visit the Cave of the Fathers in Hebron. You're right. The Arabs control the holy sites and keep it off limits to everyone else. Wherever there is Jewish control, there's 100% Christian participation. You know how many churches there are in the Old City that thrive and that are there, whether it's Greek Orthodox, whether it's Catholic, you know, it's every Christian site there is kept up. Yeah, and Egypt has a lot of Christians, but guess what? You know what Egypt doesn't have? Jews. As long as there are no Jews, there are no problems. And why aren't there any more Jews in Egypt? There used to be hundreds of thousands of Jews in Egypt. Hundreds of thousands of Jews lived in Iraq, in Iran, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, but they were all expelled. Because once Israel became a thing, the Arabs decided no longer can our Jewish citizens live here. They have to go to Israel. Oh, but then they complain. 1 second. They sent them. The Arabs sent the Jews to Israel, and then the Arabs complain that there are Jews in Israel. Anyway, I hope you join me again some other time. My pleasure. You're a top guy.